Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Brooklyn Rail's 455th New Social Environment. I'm Anya, an events assistant here at the Rail, and I have the pleasure and the privilege of being your MC today for a conversation between Philip Pearlstein and Jason Rosenfeld on Pearlstein's current show, I Love Mud, up until January 22nd, 2022 at Betty Cuningham Gallery. We'd like to thank the gallery for sponsoring today's event. And we're thrilled to have the poet Zach Wollard here, who will read to close today's program. A few quick notes before we get started. The Rail acknowledges that Black Lives Matter and that here in New York, we are on Lenapehoking, the unceded land and waters of the Wappinger, Canarsie, Munsee, and Lenni Lenape people of the Delaware Nation and Shinnecock Indian Nation. We encourage you to check the chat for a living document of resources and actions, which I will post shortly. And over the past 21 years, the Brooklyn Rail has undertaken a miraculous journey, bringing together in a single monthly publication art, music, dance, film, theater, and literature, along with thoughtful social and political meditations. As a small nonprofit, we need your support. With 10 days left this December, we are fundraising $150,000. Your contribution will directly support our writers, guest artists, production staff, and operations at the Rail for the coming year. Please check the chat for more information and links to donate. And now to introduce today's guest and host. Artist Philip Pearlstein received his BFA from Carnegie Institute of Technology in 1949 and a master's degree in art history from New York University. Pearlstein worked as a graphic designer for Life magazine before becoming an instructor at the Pratt Institute and then a professor at Brooklyn College. He has also served as a visiting artist at several prestigious institutions. His work has been exhibited in solo exhibitions throughout the United States, with paintings in the collections of over 70 public art museums. Pearlstein served as a president of the American Academy of Arts and Letters from 2003 to 2006, and currently lives and works in New York. And distinguished chair and professor of art history at Marymount Manhattan College, Jason Rosenfeld, PhD, has curated the exhibitions John Everett Millay, Pre-Raphaelites, Victorian Avant-Garde, and River Crossings. He is co-author of the monograph Cecily Brown and a senior writer and editor-at-large for the Brooklyn Rail. This is also Jason's 25th time hosting the new social environment. So without further ado, please, Jason and Philip, take it away.
Thank you so much, Anya. Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Fong. Thank you to the whole crew who are in evidence today on this shortest day of the calendar year. And welcome, Philip.
Well, thank you.
Great to have you here today. It is, again, our 455th new social environment that we've done sequentially since March 2020. And I know Fong is a big baseball fan. Philip tells me he swam in high school, not a big baseball fan. But G.E. Schwartz will appreciate this. 455. If we were clocking NSEs the way we clock home runs, we would be between Carl Yastrzemski and Jose Canseco. So we're getting up there in numbers to the magical 500. Thank you also to Betty Cuningham herself and her great crew, Jessica Kitts and Elaine Veline. And thank you also in advance to Zach Wollard, who's joining with us and will be our poet laureate for the day, as Anya said. So welcome to nonagenarian Philip, who was born on May 24th, 1924 in Pittsburgh, PA. During the first Calvin Coolidge administration, he has seen 17 presidents. I don't know if you've ever counted that, Philip.
No.
It's impressive. You are not, however, the oldest person that we have interviewed, at least I have on the NSE. That falls to Wayne Thiebaud, who Amanda Gulibisi and I interviewed last year. But when you get in the late 90s, and I would just give it to you. It's all the same. But thank you so much for joining us. Glad to see you in good health. And welcome. Welcome. Are you in your studio right now?
Right now I'm in, wow. I haven't been in I'm in a loft on 36th Street.
Okay.
Which is quite large. but I have been in the part where I did most of my work for about 2 years.
All right.
My bedroom has become my studio
I
and
see.
my
I see.
living room and kitchen.
Right.
I've been doing a series of still lifes of objects I've collected, and I go where the objects are scattered around. And
So they don't move around.
temporary studio.
I see. Interesting.
Right now we're in my bedroom
And
where I
all
have
of you can go and see these wonderful paintings, which are on view right now at Betty Cuningham Gallery downtown. The title of the show is I Love Mud, which we will get into. And it runs for the moment through January 22nd of next year. And here's the page from the website, just showing you here a view of the installation as you walk in. I Love Mud. I noted, Philip, that your last show that you had at Betty's Gallery, which was called Nudes and Other Landscapes, was on view, opened on February 27th, 2020, right before we entered the first phase of COVID. So did that show have to close early?
No, that ran its own course.
Just kept it up. I see. So that show was a kind of variety of works, including figural works and also landscape paintings from over the course of your career. This is much more focused. These are works that you have done over the course of the COVID period, since April 2020, right unto the present. And we see there behind you another one in progress. These are all watercolors. And you can read, by the way, incidentally, you can read Jessica Holmes's review of the show in the present issue of the Brooklyn Rail, of course, in the art scene section, because we are everywhere. So what gave you the impetus to pick up your brushes and work in watercolor exclusively?
Well, I've always worked in watercolor. It started primarily during my time in World War II as a soldier.
Mm-hmm.
I had 3 years in the Army then, right after leaving high school. And my father sent me a set of watercolor paints and a pad of watercolor paper.
Mm-hmm.
And I started just making scenes of, in the evenings, of what happened during the day, a kind of visual diary. And I kept it up all through the 3 years that I was in the Army. And actually, my first one-man show was of the watercolors I did during the war while I was still in Italy. I spent 2 years in Italy for the 3 years I was in the Army then. And in Italy, I had my basic education in art history. I discovered the paintings of the Renaissance, early Renaissance and medieval stuff, and all these little churches that I was an infantry foot soldier in units right outside of fighting areas. We were right away. They were called Rebel Depot. Yeah. And anyway, we were totally expendable. And that's a whole other story. But I kept up doing these watercolors of my everyday experiences. And more or less kept it up ever since.
It's interesting because those World War II images have a real immediacy. They have a real immediacy. I'm thinking about other artists who painted their wartime experiences.
I have to add one other thing that's very important. In terms of American art history. As World War II approached from the late 30s, 1930s, through the war years, America was extremely chauvinistic, and abstract art was considered communist, foreign, and we weren't allowed to do it in high school. It was discouraged. Realism was promoted. Artists like Reginald Marsh were superstars. And that's very important to remember. It's been totally forgotten about.
Were you aware of artists like Stanley Spencer, for example, who had done so many paintings of his war experience?
Yes.
Not at that time.
Yeah.
But didn't the Carnegie Institute in Pittsburgh have lots of copies of Renaissance works? Was that something that you remember seeing when you were in school there?
Well, yeah, they did have a great deal of copies.
Yeah.
Of ancient sculpture, Greek sculpture, and
Right.
But there were white plaster.
Yeah.
Pretense of being original.
Okay.
And
okay.
Architecture.
Yeah.
But wasn't interested in
Yeah.
that stuff back then.
Right. So here is a couple works from the show. On the left, Antiquities on My Shelf, one part of a suite of works with a similar title that welcome you as you enter the gallery. And then on the right, the other side of the coin in terms of collecting and material culture, toys, both of these from 2021. And these all represent your collecting habits over time. I guess you could say the works on the left are part of your collecting habits when you and your wife traveled a lot. And on the right, these are more sort of domestically acquired materials.
Most of the objects that I have were acquired from flea markets, either in New York. There was one within 2 blocks here on off 9th Avenue for many years. And everything in the world would appear there. Fragments, of course, was cheaper than the whole object.
Right.
So I bought a lot of fragments. A few things I got down in, I spent a few weeks teaching in the Dominican Republic at a summer art school down there. And kids would come along on the beach selling pre-Columbian objects, mostly Taino.
Yep.
And I bought a number of pieces from them, not knowing whether they were original or not, but they were nice to look at. And a couple of them are here in this watercolor of these strange looking objects. But most of them were acquired at flea markets, either in New York or in Rome. My wife and I frequently went to Rome. I fell in love with Italy during my time in the army there. Rome, I spent a great deal of, about 6 months in Rome. And I've always felt more at home there than I did in my own hometown of Pittsburgh. And there was a lot more to see, of course.
Right.
Of the ancient and medieval stuff.
Yeah. Well, there's a nice little catalog that Betty has put out for this show, a small little catalog with some of Philip's reminiscences about the material in the show and his travels. And also there's a little essay as well. And you talk about the idea of mud, that so many of the objects that we see here on the left were made of mud.
Out of the army experience of digging foxholes and getting in it.
Yeah.
And then they would run tractors over us to show how strong the mud was. And you'd be buried until somebody came along and dug you out.
It's an amazing story to be buried alive in basic training.
Respect mud. Then at the Vatican Museum one, I realized I was loving all these ancient sculptures and so made of clay and pottery, ancient painted Greek. It's all made of mud.
Yeah.
The,
Right.
I'm not sure about the objects we're looking at here. I don't know if they're made of mud or whether they're.
No, these are, I'll tell you, these are the most remarkable objects. They are over life-size sculptures that were from the Etruscan period. They're in the Villa Giulia now. And
Yeah,
these
I know
were
them. I
on
know
the
them.
top of, these were
Yeah.
the works that were on the top of temples, on the roof line of temples. And they're made of different colors, but they're not painted. They're actually, each color is a different kind of clay that they were using to make these. They're pretty
Yeah.
amazing.
The Villa Giulia, I had a Fulbright to Rome in 1957, 58. And the Villa Giulia opened at that time. And it was not far from where my wife and I had an apartment.
Hmm.
And I spent a great deal of time there.
Yeah.
I know these figures that you're showing very well.
Yeah, they're quite amazing on this
And,
scale using terracotta.
Yeah. And I think
So
the Vatican museums are the greatest,
yeah,
among the greatest museums in the world.
for sure. And those
I spent
galleries
a
are
lot of
usually
time-
not crowded. They're usually not busy because everyone is rushing to get to the
Yeah,
Michelangelo.
we're not interested in that stuff.
Yeah, yeah. So in the,
Collected the toys,
go ahead.
mostly because a friend of mine, or he became a friend of mine, when I lived in the Upper West Side, he had a store on Columbus Avenue of old toys,
Hmm.
which he collected. And the shop was full of hundreds of these old toys, antique toys. And I collected them while I was at least at one every couple of weeks. They were very cheap, $25, $15.
Yeah.
And whenever I took the dog out for a walk and walked past his shop, I would stop and look at the stuff in the window and pick out a toy to buy.
Hmm.
That's how that collection developed.
So we're looking at these paintings. Have you organized the figures and the forms to form a tableau, or is this how they are usually displayed in your home?
No, I used them as they're placed arbitrarily in the by
Hmm.
the window.
Hmm.
Uh,
On a lazy Susan, it looks like.
Pardon me?
They're kind of on a lazy Susan. You can turn it around.
You measure it, they're purely what they look like as shape. I
Yeah.
didn't care what the meaning was.
Yeah.
So the painting on the left, there's actually an ancient Greek
This antefix.
head right in the center.
Yeah. Is that a Gorgon?
A gorgon.
Yeah. This is like an antefix from a roof line of a temple.
Market in Rome.
Uh-huh.
And the front is an Aztec hammerhead in the form of a dog.
That's amazing. Now, do you have all of these? Do you have all of these cataloged, Philip? Are they cataloged and organized, or is it?
No.
Yeah.
They're just sitting around.
Okay, that's good. You just live with them.
I live
how
with
it
them. I constantly
should be.
arrange them according to what they look like.
Yeah, yeah, how it should be. I have to say to everyone that Philip has a fantastic. Sorry, Philip has a fantastic website of all his works.
Right. What is it? Well, it's on the right side of the paper.
Yeah.
On the left side of the image, it's actually an American Indian, but prehistoric.
Mm.
And from the Grand Canyon era, It's just called Anasazi, which just means ancient
That's this,
in Navajo,
right?
ancient ones. But it's a guy smoking pot, marijuana or something. I don't know what he's smoking.
Right.
But
Someone said,
he's ancient, prehistoric. And sitting there getting high.
right.
Covered with these fantastic geometric patterns. And this other object in the background is ancient Chinese.
Hmm.
Not sure where I picked that up, but it's a funerary urn in the form of a cottage,
Right.
a straw cottage or something.
Yeah. Someone said in the chat that this
And the
is
owl
a
is
wedding
center.
vase, a wedding vase here. So you have the wedding and the funerary in the middle, between the Gorgon between. I think there's a real playfulness to these works that really come across.
Way in the background is another Chinese funerary urn with all these little figures.
All the little figures here.
Around it. I just picked them up because they're fascinating.
Yeah.
And I wasn't trying to imitate anything that looked like something I'd seen in museums or anything.
Yeah. There's some more of these.
Probably has the most classical images in it. The two figures I did buy from an antique dealer here in New York, and they were actors' votive offering, Greek theater actors. But the vase in the background is Corinthian, early Greek, pre-classical Greek, and that kind of a interesting bell shape, and they're dancing grotesque figures, actors, I guess, wearing padding. The back sides are padded and the stomachs are padded.
Yeah.
And they make these funny gestures.
Right.
There is one classical Greek vase, a tiny one,
right,
that I bought from an antique dealer in Athens.
Looks like a harpy. Is that a harpy? Maybe.
But it's the, I bought it for the image.
Yeah. Yeah. And they work well together. Here's another example of this. This one's called Remains of Trojan War in my studio 2020.
Yeah, it's there. The Trojan studio, the Trojan War was this fragmented vase. I bought as a fragmented vase, fragments in a paper bag.
Huh.
Not even in the flea market, but on my walking towards the flea market in Rome in 1958. And for about 5 packages of cigarettes.
And then you restored it? You restored it.
With
looks
a little
good.
bottle of Elmer's glue that I brought to work.
That's excellent.
And it stayed together. I've never taken it apart.
Yeah. I mean, I think the wonderful thing that you see here, Philip, is in these works is that they feel like they have a kind of inner narrative when you're looking at them, the way that you've chosen the objects, how you've integrated them with one another, and they feel like they have, sort of playful stories within them. So in this one, for example, Han warriors on horseback in my studio, you have them as if they are part of a tableau, like a still from a film, and then you have the landscape in the background, and it feels like they are part of an action.
Actually, I do have another studio at a weekend house that we have in New Jersey.
Mhm.
on a lake,
Mhm.
Highland Lakes, and that these ones with the window were done there.
Yeah.
With you.
Yeah. It's a very malevolent looking horse. I
Yeah.
love that detail with the
So
red eyes.
I became fascinated with Han Dynasty painting
Mm.
and had a course at the Institute of Fine Arts, 2 courses in ancient medieval Chinese painting.
Huh.
Became fascinated, and especially with the drawings on scrolls from the early periods, the 10th, 11th dynasty.
Mm.
And then I discovered one artist that looks just like Cézanne. The fragmented where things are in
Mhm.
universe, not depicting them, just indicating where they are fragmented. And so then I learned later that Cézanne spent many, many hours at a small museum in Paris that had a collection of ancient Chinese painting
Mhm.
from the the palace that the guy who'd been curator when the revolution happened and the palace was ransacked, managed to get all those paintings on scrolls together and saved them in a bundle, rushed them out through the mobs, and
Hmm.
put them in his home
Huh.
where they still are.
Wow.
Nobody goes there. It's an empty museum,
Huh.
but it's a wonderful museum. And Cézanne is a direct product of that. That was a
Interesting.
revelation to me.
I have a question about process. We just had this great Cézanne watercolor show at MoMA, and you really got a sense of his process in his work. So how do you
Yeah, but
handle
they don't
watercolor?
mention the relationship to Chinese painting, and that's where it comes from.
I know. Well, it's MoMA.
None
Everything
of
has to
the
be
scholars
modernism.
picked up on that.
Yeah. They'll get around to it in the next generation.
Dynasty warriors, to me, represented when they became, I saw them at some antique show.
Yeah.
I bought them.
Yeah. So how do you make these paintings? What's your process? How do you handle the medium? Do you start with a drawing? Do you use gouache? How do you work with it?
I spent, I'm sorry, I'm joking now. I my first 10 years in New York, after I graduated from college in Pittsburgh, I came to New York and got a job almost immediately drafting for Sweets Catalogs, which was no catalogs on plumbing. It was for the building trades,
Mhm.
architects, catalogs on, electrical things and so forth for the building trades. I worked especially on catalogs for the American Standard Sanitary. I can't stand in front of a urinal now without seeing American Standard, knowing I worked on the catalog that was picked from. But I worked with this man who was an absolutely marvelous teacher at Pratt Institute, who had this special job of designing these catalogs on the outside. And I worked in his office for 9 years, every day for $1.25 an hour. And very often had to work home to finish on weekends and in the evenings that I couldn't charge him for. But they were mostly for the American Standard catalogs. a few on chain link fences, and some on other kind of electrical supplies. But he was a marvelous designer of catalogs and worked. He had been on the faculty of the Bauhaus in Czechoslovakia before the Nazis killed that, and he came to New York as a refugee. And but he had a wonderful sense of design, page design, and we actually did one book called Catalog Design, in which all of his ideas about page design were put forward. It became a standard textbook in all art schools. And people today use it without realizing where they got it from. But it was from this one man. Ladislav Suttner was his name. And there is now a big institute in Czechoslovakia of design named for him, with his own museum. And all the work I did with him over a 9-year period, all these catalogs I worked on, I gave to the museum because they had no documentation of the work he did in America. So I became his chief biographer by default. But he was basically the page layout description panels. There are about 7 different panels that became standard in ancient Egypt art. And then in the Renaissance, Alberti, the architect, actually published a book showing those 7 panels. And one became standard in the Renaissance, the golden section panel, which is a square plus 1/2 square. That became the format for Poussin and then Seurat, down through Seurat and so forth. It's fascinating. Mondrian, I studied Mondrian, especially when I was at in these years. Most modern layout is based on Mondrian, and it's all standardized.
So how does that come into play when you are designing these watercolors?
Well, I start with diagonals from corner to corner. Every piece of paper you buy is made according to one of these 7 standard panels. Come down from ancient Egypt. You go into an art supply store and you see them. So you pick the one you want. I got the golden section one, the square plus 1/2.
Right.
And that becomes my standard. And it's at the back of my mind. I can't escape it. And you divide it. You put a cross in the basic square, diagonal from corner to corner, and also in the smaller one. And then a large diagonal from the whole rectangle going this way and the other one going that way. Everything falls into place. Sorry to sound so academic.
No, but it's really instructive. I mean, you can see it here.
I studied academic art, so I don't know how they taught it.
Now, what kind of watercolors are you using in these paintings?
Well, these are, I don't know, I guess I could show you a tube.
Sure, please.
It's a mix of whatever happens to be cheapest at the time on the internet.
Yeah.
I go through some of the colors very fast.
Yeah.
Yellow ochre,
Mhm.
raw sienna, that sort of thing.
Right.
I start with yellow ochre because I would rather do the whole drawing with yellow ochre,
Okay.
but because you can always make changes and even wash them away or they disappear in the overpainting. And I do the whole drawing in yellow ochre,
Hmm.
and then I slowly build it up in color.
Let me
I'm
ask you
sorry.
something, Philip. Philip, do you limit
Yeah.
the colors that you use? Because I remember reading about the big painting that you did of Jerusalem, and you limited it to maybe 7 colors. Are you doing that here as well?
Well, you only need 7 colors. You only need 7 colors.
Okay.
Everything else gets mixed.
Yep.
I keep the water dirty.
Yep.
And I don't clean the brushes too well.
Yeah.
And right now I'm working with very, very tiny brushes.
Yeah. Let's see. Hold them up if you don't mind. There
Like
you go.
this. I
Wow.
don't know if you can see this.
Yeah, we
Hold
can.
on.
Very small, even on this large scale.
No, I don't go
Yeah.
for the big fancy
Yeah.
That become fashionable.
Right.
I don't care about fancy brush marks.
Let me ask you this.
So I
Let me
build
ask you this.
everything up very slowly with.
Do you feel like you have a different style in the watercolors as opposed to the oils?
I tend to use the oils the same way.
Okay.
I build up the oil painting. Again, I'm not painting with oils anymore.
Right.
I should say I've had 2 strokes in recent years.
Yeah.
Right at the beginning of the pandemic, I had my 2nd or 3rd stroke. I lost track. At the end of this time, I cannot walk. I cannot use my hands. My brain functions.
Mm.
And I go through a period of learning to walk, learning to use my hands in the hospital.
Mm-hmm.
Mostly Mount Sinai here on the west side. They have a fantastic team of physical, I don't know what they call them, therapists who
Yeah.
work with you.
Right.
So I've had to learn how to walk twice, how to use my hands twice in just the last few years.
Mm-hmm.
So the use of my hands is limited. I hold the brush very tightly
Mm-hmm.
near the bristles, and I don't go after fancy brush marks.
Right.
It's purely working as accurately as I can from vision.
Right. Does the watercolor
Keeping my
allow?
eyes focused.
Does the watercolor allow you a little
The
bit more
watercolor,
accident?
you can make changes. The ochre makes it easier.
Yeah.
And before it dries, finally I can wash away what I don't want and make it
Right.
correct it.
Right.
But I don't adhere to it when I go over with the final color, which is based on what I see.
Yep. Huh. So you
but
can
the
see
color-
that yellow ochre here in this painting. 2 Weathervanes, Hessian soldier confronting a flying goose. This is the battle that everyone always wanted to see. The Hessians against the geese here. And this wonderful pig and the little bird there, the candlestick holders on the mantle. And, constructed narrative here again.
There is a narrative, but I made the narrative. The Hessian soldier is a
Is a Weathervane, right?
weather
Yeah.
vane.
Yeah.
But the area that my weekend house is in New Jersey, in And it's the highest residential area in New
Mhm.
Jersey, in northern New Jersey. But it's the area that the Hessian soldiers marched to, and the Washington soldiers,
Right,
George Washington troops marched to.
right.
They become standard roads out there, but they have little signs showing you where Washington soldiers spent the winter,
Yep.
where the Hessians spent their winter. It's a very historic area full of
Yeah,
these landmark sites.
Philip,
When I saw this weather vane at a huge antique show on the piers, they used to have them once a year. I bought it. I've never seen another one. And the other one is a weather vane, but it's a flying goose. I've never seen another one.
it's unique.
The stick that holds it up goes to the wing
Yeah,
that's down vertically. So I
Yeah.
put them on my mantelpiece, and they're fighting. The Hessian soldiers attacking the goose.
Well,
And
you
there
know,
were
we are only 3 days away from the anniversary of the Battle of Trenton, so it's totally appropriate. And I have to say, I grew up in Trenton, so this history is very close to me, and this background. The Hessians who Washington routed, having crossed the Delaware. But that's another painting.
right.
Here's a work, Mickey Mouse candy dispenser, and Godzilla. You have a soft spot for this Godzilla toy, as you see him here in the middle. And I'll just show, and then you can talk about it. Here's another image with the Godzilla on the right. Go ahead.
Godzilla was a birthday gift to me from one of my daughters, my daughter Julie, on my 85th birthday. So it's not quite an antique, but it stopped working. It used to spit fire from the mouth, sparks. The mouth had a light in it, a red light that glowed red. The arms moved up and down, and it walked. It has marvelous depicted musculature. Whoever did it developed the muscles of the monster. It worked for a couple of weeks. It hasn't moved out of that position for the last 30 years or whatever it's been.
Yeah, it's ambulatory still. And here on the right, just so everyone is clear, the painting on the right is an oil painting, of course, and on the left is a watercolor.
Mickey Mouse is a toy from my friend who had the toy store. It's a candy dispenser. And I used it in the painting I did of a view of the New York City from a new apartment building. I rented an apartment for a year just to do the painting of the view, looking uptown from roughly 36th Street on the side. And then I put the Mickey Mouse on the window. The day the painting was over, I had an assistant who opened the window, and Mickey Mouse fell 9 stories and smashed.
Oh.
He pieced together with Scotch tape.
Like the Greek pot.
The little robots are just toys I bought from my friend.
Yeah.
And the guy on the scooter, clown on the scooter, is also a little wind-up toy I got from him. No reason, no meaning.
But
I just love.
They're sort of like a team there on the left on this rainbow-colored table cover. And You know, I don't want to get too into your
actually
the
from
traditional
my
work
bed.
on the right, but people should see that Philip has been using these objects in repertory for many, many, many years in his pictures. And you see them there with a couple nude models in the studio in
I
Manhattan.
never cared about the meaning of the objects.
Yeah.
In there, you have Godzilla when he was new and still working. Then there's the model of a horse for a weather vane.
Right.
The metal was, the copper sheet was hammered out over that wooden model. In the foreground is a some kind of idol.
Here. Or this one.
On the coast of Java.
Okay, that's this. Yeah.
Apparently from a headhunt, I've heard.
Yeah.
The bottom of one of my own paintings is on the wall, and the blanket on the floor is an American Indian Navajo rug that I bought from a dealer. Well, I spent 4 years with the Navajo, about 2 weeks at a time, teaching at various Navajo schools. I was a what is it when they, an honorary member of the Navajo tribe. And I gave lectures in European art history.
Can I ask you a question about this painting? On the right?
Along with my work. I had a series of community colleges, 2-year colleges. And each year I went to a different college. It was fascinating. And I got to know that part of America very well, which includes the Grand Canyon area. Most tourists are not allowed on the north side of the Grand Canyon because it's Navajo reservation, off limits.
Right.
It covers 4 states.
Wow.
I didn't know it was that big. It's the size of Texas. And I feel very privileged to have, I know it doesn't show in my personality, my Navajo affiliation. In this painting, and these puppets population, not population. What can I say? I did get to Myanmar when it was still
Burma.
And with the group, spent time going to various villages to see the ancient ruins, the ancient Buddhist ruins. But we stayed in the local villages. And there was before TV, there would be one television set, and it would be in the local little guest house. But they had all these taverns, what we would call them taverns, little tents set up around the village in which people got got the news by watching puppet shows. And then in the local flea markets, these old puppets from these puppet shows would be for sale. So I bought a bunch. And a couple men and women puppets and these animals. And that was a long time ago. But it was permanent. I've used them in a number of paintings, but most of the time they've just been hanging from the studio ceiling.
Right.
So my the geese are something I started collecting when I spent some summers teaching at the Skowhegan Summer Art School in Maine. The area was full of barns. The farms no longer were working farms, but they were full of makeshift antique stores. And I collected a bunch of, a couple dozen antique decoys. They were all working decoys. A couple of them I did buy from an old collection that were at an auction somewhere. The one in the foreground.
Oh, sorry, this one.
Is you never seen another one like it.
Yeah.
It has great big 10-penny nails for feet. And these are the swan is especially life-size swan. And I think it was used, for hunting, but somebody was using it as a decoration on their lawn. And they had a stand in front of it selling antiques, but I bought the swan from the lawn instead. Yeah.
Impulse buy. In the show, there are some beautiful landscapes that you've been doing. There are some beautiful landscapes you have been doing in the show. These are all on plein air. They're all in the out of doors.
Yeah, these were done on what is it, Cape Cod. My daughter I have one daughter who's a doctor, and she, her husband, and nephew live with me now in my studio. And a friend of hers, a very close friend, another woman doctor, lives up in the Boston area. And her family has a little cabin, which she has offered to my daughter, Cape Cod near Wellfleet, outside of, I guess it's part of Wellfleet, but it's in the woods. These trees are the view from the tiny deck of the cabin. So I was able to sit there comfortably and paint them. over a couple of, each time we've gone for a week, they were done on 2 different trips.
This one has a beautiful energy.
Well, and this is one I did this past summer, back at the same house, looking the other way, in the other direction. And they fascinated me because at a certain time of day, the bark of the trees are white. I don't know what kind of trees they are. The sun hits them in a certain way, so they look like skeletons of some sort. They're big trees, they're giant, but they're skinny and they have this skeleton-like look. And I did my best to capture them as skeletons. But I guess a lot of that gets covered up when you start adding the foliage. And that was done this past summer.
It has a freshness, and the first time I saw it in the gallery, it reminded me of Maurice Prendergast. I don't know where, but it has that kind of all over feel and brightness and that use of white, which is so stunning.
Prendergast was from Maine.
Right.
And I think, I forget exactly where, somewhere near, I won't even try to remember.
It's okay.
So there is a lot of Maine in Prendergast, but it's a lot more coastal, a different area. I think George O'Keeffe also was from Maine.
Huh. There's just a couple more from the series where the landscape out the or off the porch become part of the mise en scène for these collected creatures who seem very vivid. Asian roof tile on the left and stuffed owl on the right.
These watercolors were both done on the deck of our house at the lake, Highland Lakes in northern New Jersey, right near the mountains. We're on a high mountain.
Right. Very nice.
And they're outside on the deck. And have the owl.
Oh, sorry.
It's a stuffed owl. I don't know how old it is, but a neighbor had bought it and hated it after a little while, and just gave it to us as a gift. We took it. This is a self-portrait I did in Rome. Oh,
Yep. Sorry, go ahead. No, go ahead. Here you go.
The owl, they said, was a very old antique stuffed owl, but with that elaborate pattern of feathers. And I did it as a portrait of the owl. This is a self-portrait I did when I still had hair on my head. And it was done in Rome when I would spend some time at the Academy in Rome. I think it was sometime in the 1980s, probably 1988. I don't know what the date is on this.
Here, 1982.
I found in the 1982. The mirror I found in the flea market in Rome, and it intrigued me. It's Venetian glass, but it has all these tiny mirrors on the side. So when you look at it, you see yourself reflected over and over again. So I decided to do a self-portrait. But there are all these little self-portraits along
Mm.
the border.
Little mini Parmigianinos.
All those little portraits.
Okay, Philip, they want you to use.
Hang on a second, everybody. We're switching to a phone so that the sound quality is better on Philip's end. So just give us 1 second. Philip, are you feeling okay? He's muted. Hang on 1 minute, everybody. I think that this painting is a nice connection with what's been going on in the watercolors, because you see this dynamic that he has set up between interior space, exterior space, and bringing it together in this way and turning it into a kind of mise en scène, a kind of setting for a narrative, which we see so frequently in these watercolors.
Anyway, it's watercolor.
I just had one more image that seemed to remind me of Rome, since we're talking so much of Rome, and since we're so desperate to travel and we can't. But this image on the left of Baby Atlas bird bath reminded me of the magnificent Triton fountain by Bernini in Rome, which I had a student just give a paper on last week, because I'm teaching a class on Baroque Rome. So we were sort of revisiting that, but it reminded me of that. No, I didn't think you would have thought of that comparison. So it's very quiet still, the sound, Nick. Just to finish up, Philip, with the show, the present show, and talk just for a second about these really interesting works that are views from your studio on West 36th Street and looking out the window at a new thing which has appeared on the horizon. And that, of course, is Hudson Yards. And I love this image, Antiquities by the studio window, with this woman who looks more than a little shocked to see these buildings that are springing up around 42nd Street and Hudson Yards.
She has a really interesting history.
Mm-hmm.
The head itself, there are 6 like that in the museum in Naples.
Mm-hmm.
And in Italy. They're all lined up. They all look alike. I found this, the bottom part, the head itself, with the 2 heads on the top of her head,
Mm-hmm.
and the little birds that fit on top of that, and a push cart in a weekend. There's a piazza, or there used to be anyway, a piazza in Rome, the Piazza Fontanella Borghese. That's essentially a flea market for books. And some of the book dealers had other things in their little push carts as well. And one of them had this object. And I bought it for a couple, this is way back. Probably I can't remember whether it was on that first trip back on a Fulbright fellowship, but it was not far from that time, 1958. I bought it for a couple cartons of cigarettes. And I found out from the ones that were in the Naples Museum that they were made at a major ceramics work in the ancient world when Italy was a Greek colony. There was a major ceramics center to the west of the modern city of Naples.
Hmm.
And they turned out a lot of those what are called Italian Greek painted vases,
Hmm.
red figured and black figured, and they turned out these heads,
Huh.
and just meaning I
Interesting.
can determine. Just called in the Naples Museum, they're called beautiful ladies, but on top are these figures.
Hmm.
And at some flea market, I had bought the figure separate years and years later. And by that time, the head was in my studio in New York. I came back from Italy with the figure. The figure fit. The feet fit exactly where the original figure was broken from. What's missing is a strap handle that goes from the top of her head to the back of the big head down below. The ones in the Naples Museum, of course, still have most of the paint on it.
Huh. Beautiful.
One that I got, I found out later, was sold off by the Italian government when some archaeologists around the end of the 19th century uncovered a tomb near Milan in North Italy.
Hmm.
And that head was found in it, which is very strange for something from South Italy to have ended up in North Italy in the
Right.
ancient world.
Bizarre.
Sold off. The contents of that tomb were sold off by the Italian government, and the objects have been floating around ever since.
Hmm.
I don't know what the rest. No.
Hmm.
Anyway, screen view from my front window overlooking 36th Street, where we've watched all these new buildings in Hudson Yards go up and totally obscure the sky. We need the sky and sunsets. We no longer do. The sky has disappeared. That was my alternate title for this.
Yeah.
I used to see the sky. The figure of Mercury is old.
Right.
I bought it at an antique fair from an antique dealer from Boston. It had been the Boston Post Office, and it's carved with the figure 89. The years unknown, 1700s or 1800s, I don't know. But the sculptor probably could be identified if I really did research on it. But it was covered with gold leaf. The dealer I got it from removed the paint that had been put over the gold leaf at some point, but it was from the Boston Post Office, where he got it when they renovated the post office.
Huh.
But he didn't have the wings that it should have on its feet.
On its feet, right?
That he's
Yeah.
on the ball. It's the world. It has 89 carved into it.
Well, Mercury or Hermes was the messenger god. And I think you're sending a message that Hudson Yards is a no-go. It's such a mess and such a slap in the face of the city. And you know what? I love the fact that the place where your studio is always feels to me like one of the last few authentic places in Manhattan, along with the Garment District.
Like,
Still feels like, and maybe it reminds you still of the city as it was when you moved here.
Yeah, our block is a block of loft buildings.
Right.
And well, now a couple hotels have been put in.
Yeah. Yeah.
Loft buildings have been torn down. But it's interesting, there are also a couple of tenements left.
Yeah. Yeah.
And for a long time, the last 2 years, it was a home of the homeless. The city dumped a lot of the people from shelters around the city into this one block. And you could hardly walk the streets.
Right.
That's all been changed now.
Yeah.
Homeless have been moved into city-run shelters.
Right.
Which I understand they're not so nice.
Yeah. Well, I think we should stop the conversation right now and move to questions, since it's been a little over an hour. I encourage everyone to go to the Betty Cuningham Gallery at 15 Rivington Street, downtown. Grab some rice and beans at El Castillo de Jaguar, which is right down the street, and go see Philip's beautiful show. You'll see all these watercolor works. Many other things to talk about it, but we'll save it for another time. I'm going to give it back to Anya, and we can ask some questions. I hope, Philip, you have some energy for some questions. There you go. Thank you so much for talking with me today.
Thank you. Thank you, Philip and Jason, for this wonderful conversation. And yeah, we have a few questions from the audience. Our first question will be coming from Janet Hoffman. And you should be able to turn on your microphone now.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I was just curious as to whether Philip remembers my late husband, Len Rosenfeld, who was in a show with him at the Brooklyn Museum of Long Island and Brooklyn Artists in 1960. He was also a World War II veteran.
I'm afraid I'm not sure.
There were so many artists in the show, so but anyway, I'm delighted that he was in a show with you, and I found your talk really wonderfully interesting and reminded me a lot of many of his stories from war. And thank you so much for doing this. I'm going to definitely see your show.
Thank you.
Thank you, Janet. Our next question will be coming from Dee Finaldi, and you can turn on your microphone.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, hi, Philip. I don't know if you remember me. I studied with you back in Brooklyn College. But I helped you move down from the Upper West Side to your studio on 36th Street.
Right. Wow. I don't recognize you. You've changed all these years.
Yeah, that's okay. I understand.
You went to Italy.
No, I never went to Italy. No, I did not. Well, I shouldn't say that. I went to Italy after I graduated. Yes, you're right. You remember? You remembered. And I forgot. Oh my God. So anyway, Philip, I'd like to ask you about realism.
About what?
Realism.
Realism?
Realism, yeah. I mean, how do you approach the topic of realism? There are a lot of painters today are are painting from photographs and using or thinking about realism as a depiction of photography or an extension of photography. That certainly, I mean, I don't want to belittle that. I don't want to make any kind of pejorative against that because it's happening so often. It's been happening since Thomas Eakins. It's been happening forever. But you don't
Well,
ever you don't ever use
all
photography.
I can say, I've only, I've actually done a couple portraits from photographs, but because one was of Erwin Panofsky, who was somebody I had studied with. I had taken 3 courses with him, seminar course at the Institute of Fine Arts when I was young and he was younger. The portrait was commissioned from the guy who had been a fellow student of mine at the same time at the Institute of Fine Arts in the early 1950s. 50 to 51. And Panofsky was one of the major people at the Institute. The Institute's faculty was largely made up of men who had been art historians in Germany. And the head of the guy who was at the head of the Institute hired them as they came to New York as refugees from Germany. And this is the building we studied in, the Warburg Mansion, not its present home. And I got to know Panofsky very well, and I had read everything he wrote, everything he had published. The most important book, I guess, was the one on Dürer, The Life of Dürer. I should add, I had gone as a student to the Institute on the GI Bill, one of the benefits from having served 3 years in the Army. I couldn't afford it otherwise. And at the Institute, those of us who were on the GI Bill were regarded as interlopers. We came from the lower classes, generally, not from the upper class families where the graduates of the Institute were supposed to go on and become at least the curators at the various museums around the country. At least that's what they thought back then. In the aftermath of World War II. Anyway, Panofsky wasn't aware of that. But we were warned by another famous art historian at a separate lecture to the GI veterans, the Army veterans. Don't take the books home from the library and keep them. Please return all the books. That was the attitude towards us. You were supposed to be from the upper class if you went to the Institute of Fine Arts. And it had this very prominent group of men who had been very prominent art historians in Germany. And Panofsky was the leader. Well, one of my fellow students from those days later became head of the art history, whatever it's called. That has its own meetings once a year and so forth. And when Panofsky died, they wanted to have a special series of seminars on Panofsky. And so they wanted the portrait to be used as a poster. Well, I've never painted from a photograph before. I mean, to be a realist. And I asked for transparency to be made of the photograph. They sent me 4 photographs. The one I chose, there's one by this very famous photographer who did all the famous people, British guy whose name I can't think of, but everybody important had their photograph taken by him. He had taken a very famous photo of Winston Churchill smoking a cigar. So the background was dark. The lighting was very dramatic. There's a big puff of smoke going up in front. So they sent me a photograph of Panofsky taken by that photographer. I would not work from that. So there were a couple other photographs. One was a little snapshot taken by his 8-year-old granddaughter on his 64th birthday, something like that. Well, at this point, I was about 64. So I decided we weren't that different. In the photograph, the hand was blurry. So I projected the photograph onto a screen, and I painted as if he were sitting there, life size, directly in front of me. I painted from that. It was, but the hand was blurry. So that's my hand. I figured we were about the same age. So I put my hand in the same position, but a little higher up. But that's my hand. And part of the ear is also my ear. It was blurry in the photograph. I think that's my earlobe. The rest is Panofsky.
I think the connection with Panofsky is really potent, actually. Something I was thinking about in advance of this talk, his concept of pre-iconographic reading, iconography, iconology is in a strange way reflected in how Philip approaches his art. This is a discussion for another time, but that idea of painting what you see is what's going on.
And very often he's very funny in his writings. Like he writes about the time he met Mondrian on the sidewalk on Madison Avenue, about 88th Street or something. And they said, hello, adieu. What was the French word? Bonjour, Mondrian. And he said, are you still painting those straight lines? And Mondrian said, what straight lines? And that led me to read, that's one of his published tiny articles somewhere. So I read about Mondrian based on that exchange. Mondrian, it turned out, did not lines. Those lines separated forces from in outer space somewhere. They just represented the edges of the forces. What he was painting with the force. the forces confronting one another in different arrangements. That was a revelation also.
Anya, why don't we go to the last question?
Yeah, we have one last question. It's a bit of our tradition to finish with a question from our publisher, Fong Lee. So, Fong,
Oh, my two cents.
the floor is yours.
Thank you,
Well,
Anya. Can you put back to
one was
gallery? It's been,
Fong's asking a question.
what?
Fong is asking a
it's been very difficult to listen. I don't know, the sound hasn't been good
Can
at
you
all.
ask a question? Bob?
Yeah, the sound's been so hard for, I hope somebody got some message, the idea. Anyway, thank you, Philip. Thank you, Jason, what
Oh.
I could hear.
Welcome.
The sound has been very difficult, Philip. The reception hasn't been so as clear as we wish. But anyway, I think I got some idea what's being talked about. Congratulations on the new show. I haven't seen the show, so I'm very, very eager to come and see it before the gallery closed for the holiday. But I just want to mention, I just want to add from the last question about realism, about Philip's plays in history in some ways. I think one can say this. One can say that what Philip holds for tradition of figuration has similar impact as the way that Alex Cass have done similarly. Whereas Alex anticipate minimalist cool and simplicity and broaden the context of monumental scale to that of abstract expressionism. I think Philip have always stayed truthful to abstract expressionism in his own cool, also deliberate way too. However, the complexity, which is what added into realism, is precisely the rolling-eyed observation that he often talk about. So if you look carefully, sometimes you see things falling off the pages. They are almost like Franz Klein composition. And the treatment of the cool, which I always refer to the way that the figure or the object is portrayed, is very much similar to the way that he have written and thought of so carefully of Picabia, treatment of the machine. So that's the two contexts we can think of. But in terms of younger painter painting today, be it photograph, photography, or direct from realism, it owns a great deal to the complex history in terms of composition, in terms of how to see space that can be very lively and dynamic. They're not static. So somewhere between things are sitting in space very concretely, because Philip insists on painting from direct observation. Very few people doing that. I think Raxto Down was one of the exception, Jason. But other than that, the invention is Philip, the composer. I always feel, I see Philip as a composer of a symphony. Everything that appears into that orchestrated space is carefully placed for whatever he ended up choosing, including the picture, which we don't know. I think at times it's very unpredictable. At other times, maybe not, but wherever it is, both ways, he has been maintaining a conductor for a long time, a composer for a long time. So please come see the show, for I will do myself, come to see tomorrow with great pleasure. And thank you, Philip, for being part of this NSE, and thank you, Jason. And now back to you, Anya. Can't wait to hear Zachary read his poems.
Thank you, Fong. Thank you. Thank you for this wonderful conversation, Jason and Philip. At the Rail, we have a tradition of ending these community events with a poetry reading. So today I'm thrilled to welcome our poet laureate of the day, Zachary Wollard, to the stage. Poet and artist Zachary Wollard lives in Brooklyn, New York and Bradford, Vermont. He spends most of his time pushing color around canvases. So Zachary, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's really an honor and a delight to be here and to share the floor with Philip and Jason and the Rail crew there. I just wanted to say the Brooklyn Rail has become this great siren's voice for creative people all across the globe. And I'm honored and humbled as a lapsed and sporadic writer to be reading poetry in front of this community of geniuses and rascals. Thank you for having me. And I'd like to read a couple of my own poems and then a few poems of people whose work has kind of destroyed me in the greatest possible sense. So here we go. Glimpsing. Peerless tanager, cayenne wing, a light-edged apple tangle, neath roseate cloud corollaries, milkweed string beak, strung out tangerine, river slither, wet trout light, gone. Volcanus. From the thick-fisted fountain of doubt, arrayed metallurgy's psychotic earth molten spill, prints seafoam memories via waves and spray light, empty word prayers, sound sparks of found flinted flake color, your past colors blotting, death's long stone cold, instant glimpse, music of air in and over neutral grounds, birthplace of residual quilt, mother tongue. Deceiver of primrose. Sorrow screech silk spun out of tight iron rails, slow horn sound, deciduous Missouri air. Rippling moon, light through shuttered glass panes, peering over orderly hedgerows, we leapt down among them, getting the fuck away from these masks and hairdos. And the last poem I'll read is the one that's in the issue this round. It's called New Jars. After all the threaded bones, sculpted in tear light, laid all that voice to rest, adept monotones configured our release. The party is over, but there is another one tomorrow, and you can come with dog at 11 when the campfire begins and it's choices time. It's quite possible the mirrors are alarmed or at least bugged by tall and silver elm, focused out on light between the traces. Your photographs of where we are tend to be enigmas, locations as distance emblem, requesting frame for shattering. Okay, moving on, I wanted to read a poem by Bob Kaufman in this somewhat new collected poems that City Lights put out. This poem's called Drunk Time. Free reeds drift in the weeping morning, here on the liquor floor of hell. Phoenix burns sunlight to dead gods, as concrete patterns capture eyes. Poet madness aglow in the shadows, breathing songs amid the smoke from the eyes of long dead gods. Tall weeds walk on air between your breath and mine. Naked flint-eyed women, goddesses of nothing, brightly lit flesh, eaten in rooms of the dead. Cool shadows fall on drawn eyelids. Drunken memories weave in, out of times past. Times of pear-shaped arguments of intent and purpose. Lost among crashing noises, cynical laughter, echoes of tears as the air ends. Next, I wanted to read one by Alice Notley from her selected poems. Who do I want to tell it? It was the first afternoon of November 15th, last fall, and I was waiting for it, whatever it would be like. It was afternoon and raining, but it was late afternoon, so dark outside, my apartment, and I was special in that I saw everything through a heightened tear. Things seemed dewy, shiny, and so I knew there was a cave. It was more or less nearby, as in my apartment, it was blue inside it. Dark blue like an azure twilight, and the gods lived in the cave. They who care for you take care of at death, and they cared for Ted and were there for me too, and in life, even now. So just two more. This is from this fantastic book by the poet John Coletti called Peppermint Oil. Highly recommended. Bar Marucci. I will run towards the river. Yes, it is a beautiful day. Smith, in flowers, all morning. Just a palm tree, green, with 3 yellow wheels of sun. This van even. And I'll end with one poem by Ron Padgett titled December. December, I will sleep in my little cup. That's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Zachary. That was a lovely way to end today's event for that assembly of poets. And thank you so much, Philip and Jason. And we'd like to thank Betty Cuningham Gallery for helping make today's program possible. We encourage everyone to view our archive of these conversations on our YouTube channel, where we'll upload today's conversation shortly. And you can join us tomorrow at 1 p.m. for our 66th Radical Poetry reading, curated by Cecilia Vicuña, featuring Roberto Harrison, Cristina Rivera Garza, Sarah Riggs, and Soretta Morgan. And you should now be able to turn on your microphones and say thank you and goodbye. Thank you.
Thank you, Anya. Thank you, Philip.
Thank you very much,
Philip.
Thank you,
Thank you, Jason.
Thank you,
Zachary. Excellent.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Zachary.
Zachary.
Thank you, Jessica.
Thank you. Dory's over here in the corner.
All right, wow.
Oh, come on, hang out.
Parents in Massachusetts and my nephew making an
Thank you,
appearance. Thank
everyone.
you, Fong.
Thank you, Jason.
Thank you, Fong.
Thank you, Philip. Go see the show, you guys.
Yeah,
you,
go
Fong.
see the show.
Until
Philip,
January
keep painting.
22nd.
Keep painting, Philip.
Yeah, keep painting, Philip.
Yes, Philip.
Thank you,
Keep
Philip.
Painting.
Painting.
Keep
We'll
painting.
get you back here.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Go see the show, you guys. Thank you for the reading,
Patty
Jack.
J for tuning in.
Yes.
E and the regulars of the rail.
GE.
GE. He brings good things to life.
Mr. and Mrs. Rosenfeld.
True.
Yeah, they're here. They're coming to you live. My parents are my biggest fans. Thank you, Nico.
Thank you to all Rosenfelds. Thank you all.
Yeah.
Everybody have a great day. Stay safe.
Happy solstice.
Thank you. Thank
Wear
you.
your mask.
Wear your mask.
Yes.
Enjoy the light. Bye-bye
Stay
now.
safe, everyone.
Thank you as always, Jason.
Thank you.
Guys.
Bye.
Bye.
Have a great
Thank
day.
you. Grazie.
Take care. Ciao, y'all.